Good afternoon, my friends. This is the Grimflayer. Hope you're all doing very well today, and I am here to bring you a deck tech for a very cool, not new archetype, but an archetype that has had new life breathed into it in Modern. This is Orzhov Stoneblade, Deadguy Ale, whatever your preferred nomenclature is. This is the black-white mid-range deck in Modern. So what we're going to do here today is I'm going to give you a deck tech, and then I'm also going to talk about maybe board cards, and I want your feedback as to tweaks to this list. I want you to tell me what you think is good, what you think isn't good, what little changes we can make, because I am going to play this list through League, but you, the viewer, will help guide my hand beforehand. You're going to help me, you're going to have an input, you're going to have a say if you want it, so make sure you leave me your thoughts in the comments below, and thank you so much to all Patreon supporters who do make this content possible. Without further ado, let's talk some Deadguy Ale. So, quick overview first before we go line by line. First, why play a deck like this? Well, this is a mid-range deck, which means we are going to use effects like discard and spot removal, and repeated discard and spot removal from things like planeswalkers to disrupt our opponent's plan. We are not simply executing our own plan, we are stopping the opponent from executing his or her plan as well. On the way to doing that, we are going to play very powerful threats that can end the game single-handedly or can accrue insurmountable advantages. And over the course of several turns, we will get the upper hand on board and in terms of resources, and then we will kind of just strangle the opponent out from there, choking off their resources and overwhelming them with various advantages. And we will win the game in a moderately timely fashion, quicker than Control or Prison decks tend to win, but slower than aggro or combo decks tend to win. That is a mid-range strategy. That is what Orzhov Stoneblade is up to. So that if that sounds good, if all the decision making involved with play patterns like that sounds good, then that's a great incentive to play a deck like this. Now, why play specifically black-white? Well, as you know, I am a rock main. I do love the black-green color pair, but white has various upsides over green. It has various downsides too. But the upsides are, with white, we get access to the hardest hate pieces in Modern, like this card, Stony Silence. We also get access to another supplementary form of CMC1 spot removal to help round out our fatal pushes, which green does not provide. And we also get access to Lingering Souls, which is an extremely powerful mid-range and control mirror breaker. We also get access to interesting disruptive effects as well, for sure, in the white colors. But historically, white has had two glaring issues. Number one, compared to green, that is, in the context of a BX mid-range deck. Number one, compared to green, it does not have anywhere near as good catch-all removal, and that's still true. We don't have Assassin's Trophy, we don't have Decay, we don't have Pulse, we don't have these things, and therefore we do suffer from it against not uncommon permanents like artifacts and enchantments. We're a little less able to just destroy them, especially game one. But we make a trade-off because we have things like Tide Hollow Sculler that do give us edges in terms of hand disruption, so you could argue that that's kind of a wash. Obviously, it's more complicated than that, but really the thing that stopped Orzhov from seeing a lot of play until recently was the lack of a clock. All this disruption, all this value is all well and good, but you do need to really end the game before your opponent draws out of the disruption, and in green we have cards like Tarmogoyf, Scavenging Ooze, Tireless Tracker that can all get really big, and soon we'll be adding Questing Beast to that list, by the way. But white never had anything that can compete until now. Stoneforge Mystic is the white Tarmogoyf. Stoneforge Mystic is the game-ending threat. Not usually her herself, but the artifacts that she tutors up for you. So that has made Orzhov color pairing as a mid-range shell very, very viable. The unbanning of SFM has given this archetype a new lease on life, so that's why we would play white. And finally, why would we not splash a third color? Well, you can. You've seen me play Abzan, perhaps recently on this channel. You've seen me play Sultai and Jund. These are all great decks. You know, Mardu, Esper, Bant, They're all viable, but it's also viable to stay in only 2 colors. And overall, all else being equal, that's actually my preference, because you get a beautiful land base like this that is clean, consistent, utility-rich, and relatively painless. And that goes a long, long way in Modern. Some people ask me, why play Rock over Jund? You know, especially in the pre-run in 6 days. Why play Rock over Jund? All I can see is that you have a better mana base, and I'm like, yep, that's it. And that's why you do it. And it's actually really, really, really useful. So that is why, that answers our questions. Why play a deck like this? Why specifically black-white, and why specifically stay only 2 colors? We can answer each of those questions in the affirmative, which means this is a very viable shell. Now let's talk about exactly what we're up to with each individual card. So as mentioned, my friends, we've got a lovely mana base here. Let's talk about it. We got 4 fast lands, dual painless, you gotta love it. The downside is rarely that relevant. We've got 2 shock lands in the form of Godless Shrine and 4 fetch lands. This is all fairly stock, and I think Marsh Flats, personally, is the coolest fetch land, you know? Great name, great art. Your mileage may vary, but I'm a fan. Cool card. And, of course, on a 2-color deck, we do have the luxury of playing lots of basic lands, good against opposing fields and paths, and similar, good against Blood Moon, good against aggro. And I've got my beautifully gloomy Onslaught Plains to accompany my beautifully gloomy Onslaught Swamp. Gotta match. You gotta match. It's just strictly incorrect to not match your basic lands, but... moving on to the more interesting, perhaps, utility land column, we do have 2 Shambling Vent. Now, this is a big, big reason why, in my opinion, the Orzhov mana base is a little bit better than Golgari's, a little bit better than the Rocks, because on the Rock, you are choosing between playing your dual-producing manland, Hissing Quagmire, or Treetop Village, which is a far more impactful and far more powerful card overall, but it's mono green producing and it's ETB tapped. So you kind of have to trade off. You're either opting for power at the cost of consistency or vice versa. Here on Orzhov, we get to have our cake and eat it too, because Shambling Vent is a dual producing, very, very useful creature land. Burn is a big, big deck to beat right now. It's the #1 deck in the format according to some meta aggregators, and having a life-linking manland is obviously really nice in a meta like that. Moving on, we have 2 copies of Silent Clearing. This has been a big boon to our archetype. Granted, other decks also use it really well against us, you know, these canopy lands, but anyway, Silent Clearing is really nice. I just don't think you want to get too greedy with them. I see lists playing 3, even 4. I don't think that's correct. I think 2 is the magic number, where we have enough built-in flood insurance from them that it gives us some very nice late-game boost to our consistency, but we are rarely priced into repeatedly activating them so much that they lose us the game. We don't want to get into that territory. That completely undoes all of the good reasons to be playing merely 2 colors in the first place, right? So 2 copies of Silent Clearing is perfect if you ask me. Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth, I don't want to say that I popularized this or anything, but I think right along the time that I started playing this consistently is when a lot of other people also started playing this consistently in the Rock and in other 2-color black mid-range shells, and I think this is the right call. I think it's just a really good inclusion, and what it does is, in and of itself, we've only got 1 copy, so Legendary is not an issue. It is a perfectly serviceable replacement for a swamp in most ways, and it's going to make our plains, our Fields of Ruin, and our Silent Clearings all produce black. Of course, Clearing already could, but you can tap it painlessly for black thanks to Urborg if you have them both on the field. And Plains and Field, of course, couldn't produce black at all without Urborg being around. And Urborg also allows us to tap a Marsh Flats for black, which if we want to save this fetch land to get Revolt down the road, or if we just don't want to spend the life, well, we don't have to, because Urborg will let us just use it like it's a swamp, so this is a really nice one. I don't think you need to play an Urborg in your BX mid-range lists, but I always begin building my mana base with the intent of playing 1 copy, and this is no exception. Now, you might have noticed full 4 Field of Ruin, and you might also have noticed that I have never played the full 4, almost never, in the recent past on Rock. Why is that? Well, to answer that, we need to look at the total land count, 24 lands all day. On the Rock, I'm only on 23. Why the change? Well, here on Orzhov, here on Deadguy Ale, we are more mana intensive than we are on the Rock, I think all things considered. The Rock has more mana sinks, but mana sinks are usually optional. Whereas on the Rock, to execute our plan of, like, casting both halves of Lingering Souls on the same turn, or casting and equipping a sword on the same turn, or even flashing in and then equipping a sword. Like, all of this stuff is very mana intensive. We also have 2 very desirable man lands. We just have even more incentives than we have on Rock, which are already many, to curve out with our lands, to hit our land drops. So I think 24 lands is really where you want to be. Now, assuming that's correct, assuming 24 lands is what's up, then we can actually afford the 4th Field of Ruin without reducing our color consistency whatsoever. So, we want 18 black sources so we can consistently cast Liliana of the Vale on curve. Let's count. We have 4, 6, 10, 12, 14 dual producing sources. 14 plus 3 swamps and an Urborg, well, that would be 18 black sources all day, and then 14 plus 2 plains is 16 white, which is more than enough to cast anything in our 75 right now, consistently on curve. It's even better than it sounds, too, because Urborg does, in weird situations, if you have, like, an Urborg, a plains, and a field as your opening hand, well, you know, Urborg can still produce double and even triple black by turn 3. And Field of Ruin, of course, can also fix your mana, so we have an extraordinarily consistent mana base here, and we still get to jam the full 4 Field of Ruin, which is excellent in general. It's just an excellent land. It's often a spell, you know, you can start taxing the opponent's basics really heavily in conjunction with Path to Exile, and with them naturally fetching for them and drawing them and stuff. You can, of course, disrupt Tron and Valakut and Amulet Titan. You can kill opposing man lands. It's just an awesome land. It really, truly is. It enables Revolt for Fatal Push. It does a lot. I don't think it's quite worth it to play the 4th if you're reducing your colored sources, but again, in this particular list, we are not, so we get to have an amazing mana base, and that's the foundation of any successful mid-range deck. So the mana base is all well and good, but what about the spells? What about the actual spells? Well, let's begin with the iconic black disruption in Modern, which is Inquisition and Thoughtseize. One of the other benefits of playing a 2-color deck like this, you get to leverage 3 Thoughtseize as opposed to being priced into 4 2-split due to the pain of your lands, and it's not greedy, it's just good. So we like that a lot. 3 Fatal Push, 2 Path to Exile. I think on average, Fatal Push is very well positioned right now. And we're more likely to want to push something. We are an attrition-based deck. We do want to deny the opponent resources, so having to give them a land with Path is not ideal. But Path is so powerful. It hits everything. We've got to play some number of it. I like leaning a little more on push, though. So we've got 3 push, 2 Path in the main. But note, we also have push number 4 and Path number 3 in the side. Now, this is 1 more copy of spot removal. 1 to 2 more copies, actually, than most lists I see. Maybe I'm getting a little bit too aggressive by playing 7 total copies of these effects, but look, I think they're both really powerful cards. I think they're both really well positioned right now, and I do know that the deck has a very heavy top end, so the more we can do to stop getting overrun in the early turns, I would say the better. So, you know, you guys have the input here. Feel free to push back against it, no pun intended, if you think I've got too many of these, but it feels really nice. Feels like a good safety valve to have 3 Path and 4 push in the 75. But anyway, moving on, we have the White Tarmogoyf herself, Stoneforge Mystic. So Tarmogoyf, of course, is a very different card, but the point is that Goyf is the way you actually tend to end games most of the time on the Rock, and Stoneforge is the same way on white-black. Otherwise, that's where the similarities end. Tarmogoyf requires a lot less setup, it's a lot less mana intensive, but Stoneforge has the inherent card advantage. It's an inherent 2-for-1 almost all of the time, and it provides more free wins than a Tarmogoyf. There are just more scenarios in which the opponent simply cannot beat a resolved Batterskull or Sword of whatever, especially game 1s. And And yeah, this is, of course, a great companion to all of our other small body kind of go-wide strategy after disrupting. So, Stoneforge Mystic, we've got to play the full 4. I am only on 3 on Abzan, and I do like that. I think that's kind of a clean fit in that shell, but without access to Goyf, we just play the full 4 SFM, no question, in my opinion. Speaking of our 2-drops, we have an interesting one in the form of Tide Hollow Sculler. So this is a hand-disrupting bear that takes away a card from their hand, any non-land card, until such time as they can kill the Tide Hollow Sculler. But of course, the idea is that we can clear the way for it and protect it with our discard, and then we can take away their last removal, or if they're already out of removal, we take away their key spell in their hand. And then it's a 2-for-1. Then we are just beating down with a 2-2, having disrupted their plan. And we can also go one step further and suit up the Sculler with some protective equipment that not only makes it way harder to remove, but also makes it a way more credible threat. So a really nice fit in the deck. And note that the way Tide Hollow Sculler is templated means that opponents cannot profitably respond to it with removal, because there are 2 separate abilities on here and they trigger separately, unlike something like Kitesail Freebooter. So there are a lot of windows where Tide Hollow Sculler, there's not as much counterplay to it as you might expect, in other words. So really interesting card. I do really like what I've seen so far of it in my testing. Dark Confidant rounds out our 2-drop threat suite, and Bob is a wonderful, wonderful card. You could easily play all 4, but Burn is on top, the meta's aggressive, and even the fair decks where Bob traditionally used to shine, a lot of them are packing X1 hate in the form of Renin 6 or Plague Engineer, or even stuff like Lava Darts in the format now. Plus, even before all that, Bob died to a Stiff Breeze, right? So, great card in the deck, takes over the game if unanswered, but I kind of like being hedged down to 3 right now, just like I am in Rock. And also, just like I am in Rock, I really like main decking 1 Collective Brutality. This card is a Swiss Army knife. It does whatever you need it to do whenever you need it. It's very main deckable for that reason, despite each mode being a little bit underpowered. Altogether, the versatility, the utility, the flexibility, it's all good. And sometimes our hands just get so clunky that we are very happy to 2-for-2 or 3-for-3 the opponent, just because we've got high curve stuff rotting in hand and we're choked on mana. So Collective Brutality is really nice in those regards, and it is even better here in Deadguy Ale than it is in the Rock, because we have Lingering Souls in the deck, and if you escalate pitching Lingering Souls to Collective Brutality, well, it's now a 2-for-1 or a 3-for-2 rather than a 2-for-2 or 3-for-3, because of course you get value off of Lingering Souls even after it's in the graveyard. So that's a wonderful synergy, and it's not just a cute corner case thing. Lingering Souls being pitched to Brutality or pitched to Liliana of the Vale comes up all the time, and it's incredibly good. It's an incredibly important piece of value for this deck, but even if you're just hard casting it, this card's value is insane. With 1 card, you get 4 evasive bodies. Now, yes, it is slow. Yes, it is dirtily. Yes, it costs 5 mana, but you can break up the 5 mana over 2 turns. And look, we're trying to make the game slow. We're trying to extend the game. If you're just trying to race a deck with Lingering Souls, yeah, that's not going to work. But if you're disrupting them so heavily that they're scrambling for top decks, then your Lingering Souls really take over the game, and they are especially good against opposing interactive decks because very little interaction lines up well against 4 bodies out of 1 card. And they are ideal sword bearers because, of course, once again, their expendability, the sheer quantity of them, and their natural evasion means they are very, very good at carrying swords and starting to close out the game. Moving on, we have 4 copies of Liliana of the Vale. As mentioned, she and Lingering Souls are best friends, and even if Lingering Souls wasn't in the deck, just play for Liliana. Just play for, in my opinion, if you're on any kind of a black mid-range deck right now. We have no more looting, we have no more Hogak, and we have Stoneforge in the format. All of these changes mean that Liliana is even better positioned than she once was. Arguably the very best card in this entire archetype, no matter what color combination you're splashing alongside black. She is simply that good, just play for her, and again, I cannot overstate how good she is with a full 4 Lingering Souls alongside her. Rounding out the 3 drops, we have a flex slot that I have assigned to Kaya's Guile, which is a really interesting new modal spell. You choose 2. Each opponent sacks a creature. Exile all cards from each opponent's graveyard. Create a 1/1 spirit with flying, and gain 4 life. So, of course, this is main deckable Graveyard Hate. It's nice to have this since we don't have Skoos in this archetype. It is main deckable Life Gain, which is quite relevant right now. The Edict effect is probably the most commonly high-powered effect on this card. Notably, does also get around Leyline of Sanctity because it does not target. And finally, we can make a Spirit in a pinch, which really isn't even that bad, even though I think it's kind of the weakest card. It's still a good floor. It's never a dead mode, really. And, of course, the fact that it's instant speed, you can blow out like an attacking Flicker Wisp or another X1, high-value attacker. And spirits, as we just mentioned, are good at carrying these weapons. So Kaya's Guile, not a strictly necessary one, but one that I do believe is pretty nice in the archetype. I've liked it so far as I've been testing it. Let's talk about the Stoneforge package. So you will see people playing 4 Stoneforge and 3 weapons like I am. You will see 4 and 2. You will see 4 and 2 with the 3rd in the side. Or you will see 3 and 2. I think all of those are at least somewhat reasonable, but I don't think we can only play 3 in a pure black-white deck, as already mentioned, so we're priced into playing the full 4 SFM, and therefore I have chosen to play 3 copies of this equipment because, look, I don't want to get unlucky and draw 1 piece of equipment before my first SFM, because then the first Stoneforge can tutor up your last piece of equipment, and then you have 3 Squires in your deck that you're top decking toward. And these games tend to go long. So I think between that ratio being a little bit more friendly to our top decks, and the fact that we have so many really valid sword carriers in this deck, that it is really not that bad if the game is going long to top deck an extra sword that we don't even, it's not like we need to tutor for these things to be good in our deck is what I'm trying to get at. So Batterskull is a absolute must-play if you're on Stoneforge because it functions on its own. You don't need to equip it for it to start competing in combat, start stabilizing your board. Vigilance, Lifelink, it's just really that good. You just gotta play it. And in my view, Sword of Fire and Ice fits in the same category. Like, yes, pro-red, pro-blue, not as relevant protection colors as they are in Legacy, right? But look, the on-hit effects are just so good. This is the most proactive, consistently universally useful sword due to its effects. If you connect, you shock any target and you draw a card. That is incredible. I think you've just kind of got to play it. Now, Sword of Light and Shadow. So, as mentioned, maybe the 3rd equipment is not something that everybody plays. I'm choosing to. Let me know what you think about that. But assuming we are playing the 3rd equipment, this could be Sword of Feast and Famine, which I have played to good success in Abzan. It could also be Sword of Sinew and Steel, which is a very high-ceiling, viable sword in my opinion. But in this deck, I'm choosing to play Light and Shadow because, number 1, we are seeing a ton of burn lately. I can't say it enough. More life gain, the better. Number 2, the recursion is very good in the grindy games and is another thing that plays well alongside Escalation and Liliana +1s if we have to end up pitching a creature, or if it's the best thing to do, we can potentially buy it back with Light and Shadow. And we have some things with some good ETBs in this deck by mid-range standards. We don't have a ton, but we do have SFM and Tide Hollow Sculler, so buying those things back can be really nice. And pro-white, pro-black, those are 2 very relevant protection colors right now. So that's the equipment package. And finally, rounding out the 60, my friends, we do have Kalitas Trader of Get, and this is one that I am never, ever sad to see in anyone's mid-range list. I'm like, oh, you're playing a Kalitas. Awesome. The guy is great. Army in a can, main deckable Graveyard Hate, and ironically, the Graveyard Hate he brings is more viable now that the Graveyard decks are nowhere near as common because he was just too slow to compete with Faithless Looting decks and with Hogak decks most of the time. And now that the graveyard decks are still present but are way less explosive and way less common, Kalidas is great because he allows you to play like one fewer graveyard hate card than you otherwise might need to in your sideboard, because he does bring the incidental graveyard hate, while being very proactive, very main deckable, good burn hate, good against Ether Vial decks, great in mid-range mirrors, great against aggro in general, and even got some cool upsides against stuff like Tron. So while Kalidas, like Kaya's Guile, is not strictly necessary, I am choosing to play him, and he's been just as good here as he was in Rocket. Feels pretty cool to suit up a Kalidas with a sword, that I can tell you. So that's our 60, my friends. Let me know what you think, and now let's talk about the side. Real quick rundown of our side. Right away, we have kind of an uncommon selection, Nile Spellbomb. I see most people are on a second Surgical or a Rest in Peace, but I think Nile Spellbomb is just great. It's just value-oriented graveyard hate. You're happy to bring it one copy in against Jund, against Control, and obviously it's still really good against the all-in graveyard decks. And, Rest in Peace, it is a non-bow with Lingering Souls, it is a non-bow with Light and Shadow, and it's redundant with Kalidas, right? So Spellbomb, maybe it should just be a Rest in Peace, maybe because we're in white we should play the harder hate, but for now I am going to run with Spellbomb. We'll see how it treats us. As mentioned, the extra path in the side, and speaking of hard hate, we do have Stony Silence. Also, speaking of non-bows, yes, it is a non-bow with the sword package, but look, we can hedge a little bit away from that, right? Like, I think how I side against Tron here is side out one SFM and one piece of equipment, bring in 2 Stony Silence. That way, we're not drawing too many cards that are dead under Stony. Remember, Batterskull can still function on its own under Stony, you just cannot bounce it or re-equip it, but unless they deal with a Germ, it's still a 4/4 Vigilance. And Stony, I think, is too powerful not to play right now. Aforementioned Tron matchup, Wurza's top of the meta, Affinity never goes away. Yeah, I feel obligated to register this card. Definitely a powerful one. Disenchant, not really a powerful card, but hey, any excuse to play the old bordered cards, right? You gotta love it. And, we're not on green. We don't have Trophy, we don't have Pulse, we don't have Decay. We gotta play something like this, and it might as well just be the OG Disenchant, one of the oldest tools in the book. A nice catch-all for matchups where they've got those types of permanents. Moving on, I really like one surgical minimum in most mid-range decks I'm ever going to build. Great in conjunction with Field and Fulminator against big mana. Great in conjunction with Discard against combo decks. And obviously really nice graveyard interaction as well, allowing us to curve out, to tap out, and still have interaction at the ready. So gotta love the surgical. We do have the Fatal Push, which we've talked about. I like the second Collective Brutality as well, with Burn everywhere and with it being able to flex into a lot of matchups. It fills out the numbers in the sideboard really well, especially in the early stages of tweaking the deck, where we're not exactly sure if everything is going to go perfectly to plan. So having access to another card that's really good in a lot of matches is always nice. And speaking of really good cards, my favorite new card, that is by far the Plague Man. We're playing 3. If you don't know why, just watch my videos. Watch my previous deck techs and gameplay videos for other BGX archetypes. Plague Man. The Plague Man is where it's at. He's just that good. Wish I could play 4, but I think 3 is the number for this particular build. Kambal Council of Allocation is a really interesting black and white hate bear. Everything from a value-oriented matchup where you want to tax them a little bit and provide another body, just another threat that can get you value, to matches where he is going to totally hose a deck that's trying to chain a bunch of spells together. Kambal is really, really interesting. He is more powerful than he looks on paper, and he is a true hate bear that a lot of decks kind of have to remove to win, and therefore it becomes really interesting with these protection effects. Again, this is kind of, it's a lot of setup. It's just another angle to consider when evaluating the cards. It's not like we're playing him because we can protect him with the swords, but it is an angle that makes him a little bit better in this particular shell. Finally, we have 3 copies of Fulminator. I never really leave home without 3 Fulminator on the rock. Here on Orzhov, I have seen a lot of lists 5-0ing with only 2, and maybe that's a place we could find room for some of the maybe board cards we're about to talk about as cutting a Fulminator. I don't know exactly why that is, maybe between Forefield, between the Disruption of Sculler, and between stuff like Stony Silence and Disenchant. Maybe we just have enough game against Tron and against other big mana decks where we don't quite need the Fulminator as much, and it's also a little bit more of a non-bow alongside Path than you see in the Rock lists. Like, yes, in Rock you ramp them with Trophy, but often you're hitting a land with Trophy, so it's mana neutral, right? So maybe we could go down to Fulminator, I don't know, but I have been playing 3 just to test while I'm relatively new to this archetype. So there we go, my friends. That's a 75 I've been testing. It's been really fun. It's been performing really well. But let's talk about a few maybe board cards that we want to consider. The first and most important maybe board card to discuss is Giver of Runes. We've got a white 1-drop 1/2. She can tap. Another target creature you control gains protection from colorless or from the color of your choice until end of turn. So, this card has been a 4 of in some 5-0 lists, and it's been a 0 of. I've also seen 2 of, and I believe 3 of. So, seems like her role in the deck is unsolved, let's put it that way. It's unsolved, she is on uncertain footing, but she does a lot of really powerful things, like, obviously, it's really nice to lower the curve. It's really nice to lower the curve. We do have some high-end stuff. Maybe we could see cutting a couple of the higher-end cards, or at least one higher-end card and then one other card, for maybe a pair of Giver to make our curve a little bit friendlier. It is also nice because we have so many creatures that we want to protect from removal. We can go turn 1 Giver into turn 2 SFM, and then we can protect her so she gets to 1-tap and flash in a Batterskull. We can protect a Bob so he continues gathering advantage and carrying the game away with resource advantage. We can protect a Sculler so we keep the 2-for-1 intact. We can, of course, just equip the Giver herself with a sword. Anything that's a low curve card is kind of naturally a good sword carrier, even if it does not otherwise have synergies with being equipped, right? So, and finally, Giver of Runes is a core. You know, we don't want Stoneforge Mystic to feel too isolated in the deck, so getting a fellow core in the ranks might make Stoneforge's morale a little bit higher. Who knows? But Giver of Runes is the single biggest question mark. Do I play her? Do I not? Well, I don't know. Mixed results from the 5-0s, mixed results from people I've been talking to about this, but I do know that Giver was by far one of the most expensive acquisitions to the deck as I picked up the missing pieces, so I decided to run it for a little while without the Giver. But of course, before we go into a league, if the consensus on this channel is that I should play maybe a couple Giver, we'll definitely give that some real consideration. I genuinely don't know, so let me know what you think about Giver, and let me know what you would cut from this 75, or I guess the 60, because she's really a main deck card, to make room for her. And finally, my friends, another little cluster of maybe board cards beginning with Ashiok Dreamrender. I think Ashiok is very well positioned ever since the looting ban and the Hogak ban and the SFM unban. For the same reason Kalidas' Graveyard Hate is now more viable, the same is true for Ashiok's. Also, does a lot of work against big mana, does a lot of work against other archetypes, and, coincidentally, can hose Stoneforge Mystic. Along with, if we were in a mirror match, for example, I think Ashiok would be a card we'd really consider bringing in because shuts off the SFM search, can tick down to get rid of graveyard value with Lingering Souls, and can shut off their fetch lands as well. So definitely a tempting one. However, I don't know if we strictly need Ashiok quite as much as we do in other archetypes, simply because with Forefield and with the Tide Hollows, we do have a lot of power in those matchups anyway, but Ashiok's still very viable, one that we would consider for sure. Next up, Sorin, Lord of Innistrad. I mean, we could be talking about Sorin, Solemn Visitor, Kaya, Orzhov Usurper, or probably other black-white value walkers. I chose Sorin, Lord of Innistrad because look how cool he is. He's just the living embodiment of the Orzhov color pair. I just think he's the man. Really a pet card of mine. And look, he's very viable in his own right. You can tick up to make a life-linking token, you can tick down for an emblem, and you can have a really swingy ultimate in a grindy game that you don't have to stick around all that long to reach, right? So and those tokens would wield a sword just fine. So we could be investing a slot into Sorin or another value-oriented planeswalker like that, and if we're thinking about that, we should really think about Gideon, ally of Zendikar, the go-to white value planeswalker. Another very, very nice synergistic piece alongside the Stoneforge package, and a good value piece in his own right, for sure. Speaking of synergy with the swords, we got Mirren Crusader. We gotta at least talk about it. It might be a little too cute, might be a little win more. The double white casting cost on 3 can be slightly hard to handle with this deck, but look, he's a double striker, pro-black, pro-green, pretty decent power level on his own, and then if you think about equipping Sword of Fire and Ice, well, you've got a 4/4 double strike with protection from 4 different colors, and when he connects, he's going to shock 2 targets and draw 2 cards. If that is not mid-range value, I don't know what is. So again, maybe too cute, but I think playable. Definitely a sweet fun of. We should at least think about it. We should at least keep it around, keep it on the back burner. Finally, along those same lines, we have Core Firewalker. This would be just another nod to the presence of Burn. Very, very difficult card for Burn to deal with, and definitely a strong, strong hate bear that fits well in our archetype. So those are some other cards that are on my mind, but the list I've been testing and the list that, if I don't make any changes, I will be running, I believe, through the first league is this 75 right here that we just broke down in detail. So my friends, I once again will say, let me know what you think. We'll work together, we'll make a few tweaks. I don't want to reinvent the wheel. I think the shell is strong, I think the core is strong. The results in admittedly casual games, but the results have been very promising. The deck feels good. The deck has a similar list have put up 5-0s, more or less ever since Stoneforge got unbanned. So let's work together. Let's make a few tweaks. What should we shave? What should we add? And then soon, my friends, very soon, we will play Orzhov Stoneblade through a league on this channel for your edification and your entertainment. Thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned because we're going to continue to break down Eldraine spoilers as they come out. And we're going to play at least one more Rock League, I hope, before the Eldraine cards come out. And then when they do, well, we're going to be going on the Questing Beast plan on the Rock for a little while, for sure. But in the meantime, we'll be playing some Stoneblade variants too. So thanks again for watching. Look forward to hearing from you. And I will talk to you soon. Hope everybody out there has a wonderful day.